I am finally sitting across from the one and only Melissa. Thank you so much for being here to share your story with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to sharing my story.
You had so much that you shared in your birth story in the forum. And I mean, there's so much to touch on, and you very generously have been willing to kind of go there on everything. You had your first baby how long ago now? How many months?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
The fact that you're even here is incredible. Like on Zoom. Oh my gosh. 3 weeks ago. I'm like months? No,
Yeah,
no, weeks.
weeks. Yeah.
And you had an unplanned cesarean birth after dealing with cholestasis, an induction. Turns out baby's head was kind of tilted and they kind of were like, this was never going to happen
Mhm.
vaginally. You had a lot. And you also mentioned in what you wrote to me that you had your first baby, you're 39. So already there
Yeah.
was like the age component, and that you shared you feel like you're in a larger body. And so there's that component in terms of how that might or might not impact your care. So I'm going to just follow your lead and let's talk about wherever you want to start.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I had my first baby 8 days after my 39th birthday. So it was yeah, as I mentioned, unplanned cesarean after 3 days of trying to induce, and it didn't happen. I always had a feeling that it might end up there, and I think I was warned as well by my doctors that it might end up there. They induced me at 37 weeks and 2 days.
Mhm.
And because they said usually with cholestasis, they don't want to go past 38, yeah, 38 weeks.
Mhm.
But in the end, it ended up being 38 weeks anyways when the baby was born. So I guess the baby just wasn't ready to come out. And I think one of the fears, I think, why we thought that it was going to end up there as well is that according to the ultrasound, the baby was like in the 98th percentile.
Oh,
So also they didn't want to wait, longer for the baby to be even bigger, because even though I am, I'm tall and almost 6'1", and on the bigger side. So they're like, oh, well, it's going to fit anyways. It should be able to fit, but we don't want to wait too long either. So, but finally, when the baby was born, everybody was like, oh, he's not that big.
how much did he
So,
weigh?
he weighed 3.7 kilos.
Okay, what is that in pounds? I'm trying to.
That's about 8 pounds. Yeah,
Okay,
around
yeah.
8 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. All right. So can you so I mean, I have so many questions. You mentioned also you're in Montreal, you're from Montreal, but you
Yes.
did a lot of the class virtually from Saudi Arabia where you were
Yes.
for work. So
Yes.
did you have prenatal care there?
Yes, so I did see a doctor, but that was pretty much the only thing that was available. Like they're really not big on prenatal classes or anything like that. So it was just going to see the doctor, on a monthly basis. They were okay, but some of sometimes I guess the medical care is a bit different.
Sure.
So sometimes I'd read online, and it's like, oh, every time you should have a urine test. And I'm like, oh, I've only had one in my whole pregnancy,
Mm,
And then, ultrasounds. Well, the doctor there, every single time I would go every month, they would do it, like the doctor would do an ultrasound. So that was very different to the
sure.
experience here, where I think it's only like three ultrasounds or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So in a way, I mean, some things were good, some things were just different. And sometimes just not knowing if you could, trust, I guess that was the major issue, is the trust in the healthcare. But I think the experience overall was all right. But I did feel a difference when I came back here, at 32 weeks.
Mm.
And for the end of my pregnancy, it was a bit of a different method, I guess.
Yeah. Did you feel more like how did you feel? I guess maybe it would be good for us to understand the journey of the cholestasis. Did you have itching? What were the symptoms? How
Yeah.
did you kind of go, oh, I think something might be going on here.
Yeah. So actually, when I came back to Canada, so at 30, I think I was 32 or 33 weeks, a week later, I caught COVID,
Uh,
actually. So
oh,
yes, I didn't
merciful.
mention that before, but yeah, I had COVID, but it was fine. It was my second time having it, and it really lasted like 2 days, minimal symptoms and everything was okay. But then, maybe 5 or 6 days after I tested positive for COVID, during the night, I was just itching everywhere. And I didn't know what was going on. And then obviously the first thing you do, you go online, why am I itching? And then I thought, oh, well, is this,
Yeah.
a secondary effect of COVID, or, something else?
Yeah.
And luckily the OB that was following me here is actually a friend. So I was able to write to her and say, okay, what do I do?
Mhm.
Because I hadn't even gone to my first appointment with her, because
Yeah.
it was meant to be while I had COVID. So I had to postpone it.
Oh my
So
God.
she just said, well, just go to the hospital, where I was going to give birth, go to their triage, and then we'll do some tests. And obviously they did some tests, and then they saw that it was cholestasis, but not a severe case of it.
Okay.
So they just gave me medication, and then, everything with the medication was fine after that.
And so, did they do a blood test? Like, what was the
Yeah,
test?
they
Yeah,
did. They,
just
they
let us
did
know.
blood tests. Yeah,
Yeah.
just blood tests. The blood test here does take, I think, 3 days to get results.
Yeah.
So at first they just gave me an antihistamine, to try and calm down the itchiness, which did help. And then afterwards, when I saw my doctor, she gave me the prescription for the medication for the cholestasis.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that was you were about 33, 34 weeks at that time?
Yeah, at that time, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of knew at that point, or did you know that you would need to be induced?
Yeah, so yeah, when I saw her before she gave me the medication, she said, okay, well, even though it's not a severe case, we usually don't want to go past 39 weeks with cholestasis, but we try to at least arrive at 37 weeks. So I
Yeah.
knew at that point that I was probably going to be induced sometime between 37 and 39 weeks.
Okay. And how did that impact you? Like, I don't know if you had had a particular plan or hope for your birth, but when you're
Mhm.
told, you're like, great, like top 10 things you can't control, right? Like there's no known
Yeah.
way of preventing cholestasis. So you're like,
Yeah.
great, like, that's no longer really an option. So how did you
Mhm.
navigate that mentally?
I think for me it was okay. I mean, as I mentioned in my in the questionnaire that I responded to, I didn't really have a specific vision for my birth. It was just like, well, whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather just know everything
Mhm.
about all the different options and all the different things that might happen, rather than say, well, I want it this way and then be disappointed, or just be prepared for like that one path, and that ends up not happening. So for me, it was almost actually a relief, because although like I had seen things about induction and not being, as routine, like when it's not needed, I was like, well, in this case, it's needed, so I'm okay with it. And it was also a bit comforting to say, well, it's going to happen this day, so to actually have a date instead of just be there waiting, for my water to break, or or just to start
Totally.
having contractions. It was kind of a relief to have like a specific date, and I know like, okay, this is when it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had like everything packed. You kind of like were like, all right, this is it. And then did
Yeah.
they start with a Foley bulb? How did they start your induction?
Yeah, they started with the balloon.
Yeah.
So I went one evening, and then they inserted the balloon. I came home, and then had to go back at 7 a.m. the next morning, to start oxytocin and everything else. And I think the first warning that maybe this was not going to work was that normally the balloon, they say within like 4 hours, or between anywhere between 4 and 8 hours, it should fall out on its own.
Mm.
Means you're 3 centimeters dilated, and me, it just wasn't falling off. It
Got it.
wasn't falling out. So when I got to the hospital the next morning, I'm like, well, the balloon is still there. They're like, okay, well, we're gonna try to pull on it, and then they pulled, and it didn't come out. so so I think it took an extra, like, I don't know, a couple of hours before it actually came out. And obviously with the oxytocin, started having contractions, but they were very, very mild, like, I think out of like maybe probably a 3 out of the pain scale, like it was really nothing. And that lasted pretty much all day. So then, since that didn't work, then they said, okay, we're going to try the and I forget, Cervidil, I think it's called.
Yep.
It's
A
like,
gel.
yeah, the hormone. So they put that in, which was very, very painful and uncomfortable experience. I think I was not aware of that, but it's almost like sandpaper going in, and it's really, really not comfortable.
Really?
But yeah, yeah. And so they put that, and then they put me in like the high risk pregnancy unit, I think they had, because they're like, oh, you don't need to be monitored as often, with that. So we just put you there, and then we have to wait 12 hours, and then we start, inducing again. So they put me there. The next morning, I was starting to have contractions. So I'm like, okay, this is it, finally.
Mhm.
And then I brought back to the, birthing unit. And then contractions just stopped on their own. So then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna try cervical again. So they put a second one in. And then they kept on saying that they felt like it would what would make it progress was if actually they were able to break my water. And they tried, like, I think I had so many pelvic exams while I
Oh
was
my
there.
gosh.
They tried like so many times. I think I had like 6 different people try to break the water, and it wasn't working. And finally on day 3 they were able to break the water. And then the contractions, started going, more and more. And that's when it actually, yeah, started progressing. But I was still only at like 3.5 centimeters dilated. So um yeah.
It's a lot. Like I'm
It's
just
a lot.
sitting here going, "Oh my God, like it's a lot." And this is all you're just dealing with discomfort and
Yeah.
waiting and
Yeah,
hoping.
but the pain, like, luckily the pain wasn't that bad. Like,
Okay.
it was pretty bearable up until, the third day after my water broke. So at least, I was able to sleep, to do, get distracted,
Yeah.
and think of other things. And yeah, just hoping for it to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was pretty much it. And then finally, like, yeah, when the water broke and the contractions were bigger, in my mind I was like, okay, well, I'll see. I hadn't really made up my mind yet about epidural or no epidural. I wasn't against having one, and I was like, let me see how the pain is, and if I can, I won't do it, and if not, I'll do it. And in my mind I was like, okay, well, when the contraction started, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna wait maybe until I'm like 7 or 8 centimeters dilated. And finally, after like, an hour and a half or 2 hours of,
Oh yeah.
contractions, I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'll have the epidural. And but they were able to give me a light one, which would still allow me to walk around and be on the ball and everything. So I was actually able to sleep for like a good, 5 hours.
Yes.
And then I woke up, and they kept on, upping the oxytocin, and to try and make me try to get me to have, bigger contractions. And then finally, it didn't take that long before, yeah, my friend came in, and the doctor came in, and she said, okay, well, this is not going to happen. We're going to do a C-section. So in
Mhm.
that case, I was kind of happy that I had gone for the epidural early,
Oh
because,
yeah.
they would have had to do it anyways. And at least I didn't have to be in so much pain.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. I mean, that would probably be very comforting to know it was your friend who was the doctor sort of
Yeah.
giving you that news. Like,
Mhm.
did that have a
Yeah.
big impact on you, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, almost as a joke, we said it's kind of like the baby waited for it to be her turn to be like the doctor there.
Mhm.
So because, there were other doctors before, and it's only on that third day that she was the doctor on call.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it was comforting. And because, I knew that she wanted the most possible to have it natural birth. So if she was then saying, okay, no, we have to do a C-section because, the baby's heartbeat is not, she's not liking what she sees, then, I was, comfortable with that being the right decision.
Okay, good. The trust is so important to
It
feel
is.
like you have trust in that moment because it's so new. Obviously, you're like, I just, I want everyone to be okay. I want to be okay. I
Yeah.
want baby to be okay.
Yeah.
So what was it like then, in terms of how did your cesarean go? How did your recovery go? All of that.
Yeah. So the cesarean, I mean, I was in, quite quickly. And, as I said, luckily I already had the epidural in. So all they had to do was, up the medication, and then I was in. My husband was able to be there with me. It was all very, very quick. They, showed me the baby, cut the umbilical cord. They didn't really give an option of my husband to cut the umbilical cord, but I guess we hadn't really discussed that before with my doctor.
Mhm.
But I think he was okay with it as well. I mean, for me, it was just the most important was the baby to be okay. So, whatever happens, the baby's okay. And then finally, after, weighing and all of that, they just kind of like wrapped him in a blanket and then put him on my chest for some skin to skin, which was nice. With my husband, they took some pictures for us and everything. I think that the thing I was not expecting though in the cesarean was more of I was just shaking uncontrollably. They said that this happens and it's normal, but it's just I didn't know that. So at first, when it first started happening, I'm like, why am I shaking so much? And it even made it hard to like even hold the baby or anything because I was so shaking so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything went well in that sense, and then now healing from it is okay. I'm still a bit unsure. I mean, as I said, it's been 3 weeks now of what I can do or can't do in terms of exercises and recovering and so on. Like I want to I feel like it's going well and the scar is healing well, but I don't want to overdo it also and then make the recovery time, longer or worsen things.
Yeah, this is so common because you're not really given any guidance, right? You're
Mhm.
sort of like, I mean, what guidance were you given when you left the hospital?
Um, I guess not holding anything, not picking up anything bigger than the baby, not driving.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that was pretty much it.
Not
It
driving
was
until when? When did they say not to drive?
they said not to drive for 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was more about like, taking care of the incision and, when to take off those steri strips that they put and everything and what to look for, I guess, if something is wrong, but not just in general of what
Mhm,
to do.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, this is something that we're definitely working on and just added more to the resources in the C-section recovery, cesarean birth
Hmm.
recovery in the course because there is a lot of fear and this any of that sort of pulling in your incision or feeling like there's deep pain, it's
Hmm.
hard to know like is this it's normal for there to be some discomfort when you first do say, example, cat cow, right? That
Hmm.
extension when you're arching your back is going to pull a little bit on your scar.
Hmm.
But like how much is too much?
Yeah.
So generally we say like no more than like a 3 out of 10,
Hmm.
especially at the beginning.
Hmm.
But it's normal to feel something at first. And it sounds like you're doing really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I can do more and more, and I guess sometimes I may push myself a bit more because I feel it the next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I know I mean it's a surgery, so you have to be able to
Mm.
recover, from that. And in the past when I was a teenager, I had an appendectomy. So in a way it's kind of like I kind of knew more or less what I was getting into because I remembered, then even though it was like a less of a scar, but still
Yeah.
that it takes time to resume normal activity and so on.
Sure.
And I'm so grateful for my husband too that really stepped up, changing the baby and doing all the diaper changes and all that because trying to get out of bed, holding the baby in the
Oh
beginning
God, yeah.
especially
No.
was like impossible.
No. Not at all. It's like trying to that rolling over and using your arms and trying to protect your
Hmm.
core. It's a
Yeah.
it's a feat for sure.
Yeah.
What would you say to anybody? I guess I have two questions. What would you say to anybody knowing they're going in for a cesarean birth? What would you say to them to help them prepare? And then what would you say to yourself if you could go back and talk to your pregnant self?
Hmm. Well, what would I say to people who are going in for cesarean? I think it's more of knowing your limits and not trying to do everything right after the C-section and being able to ask for help when
Mhm,
help is needed.
mhm.
Because I know certainly in the beginning in the even in the hospital, my husband would be sleeping and let's say the baby's hungry, but he's in his little bassinet and I can't, reach. And I tried to do it and then, I couldn't. And then it's just like, no, 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 okay, I really have to wake him up to, to tell him to give me the baby.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard because when you're so independent and used to, doing things on your own, to actually ask for help is a big thing. So
Yeah.
I think yeah, that's the most important. And I think what I would tell my pregnant self, I think is more, I mean, I was quite content with the way, my pregnancy went, even with all of the issues. I still find I was very lucky, and everything went very well, relatively. So I think, being pregnant, I don't think I'd do anything differently. I didn't stop myself from doing everything. I mean, I traveled. I went with my partner to the World Cup. You know, we traveled to different places. Um, you know, even with being sick and having COVID and all of that, it was you know okay to deal with, and I was never panicked about it.
Mhm.
And you know, in the end, it's when you look at your baby, everything is worth it. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. You have a very good outlook. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And you mentioned in your form, you mentioned just you felt like the course also helped you with advocating and being able to have these conversations, you
Yeah.
know, and be part of I think you used the words part of the decision-making process.
Mhm. Yes. So I really felt like I knew what to ask. And, you know, as I said, I didn't have a set plan. I just wanted to have all the information.
Mhm.
And at least now, when the doctor was talking about something, I'm like, oh, yes, you know, I read about that. I know what you're talking about, instead of it being, you know, just these big terms that you don't understand. And also, you know, when I was in Saudi, being a bit less comfortable with, I guess, the level of care, it was easier for me to ask the question. You know, like for, you know, for example, the vaccine for the difference in blood types, you know, the doctor didn't talk about it, so I'm like, okay, well, you know, I know me and my husband are different, so I need to ask about it. And she's like, oh yeah, yeah, you know, you don't need that until, you know, later, and so on. But at least I was able to ask, you know, those questions, and
Yeah.
to make sure that, you know, I was getting the appropriate care. So that's more of, you know, what it allowed me to do, is really just ask the right questions, not necessarily direct and say, you know, I want it to happen this way, but
Mhm.
just to have all the information.
Good. Yeah. Facilitating a productive conversation, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Well, I hope you're doing really well. And thank you for making the time today at only 3 weeks
Yes.
postpartum. You're a superstar. Do you have some family helping you out at all?
Yes, yes, I do. We're actually staying with my grandmother, so who's a great grandmother now.
Amazing. That's awesome.
And yeah, so it's no, it's really nice. It's been good, and you know, building our family and getting the routines in and everything, and yeah, everything's been
Yes.
going great.
Good. Well, I'm happy to know that you have a village around you. We need more
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you very much.